Welcome to the Martial Arts Lifestyle Podcast, where we talk with martial arts practitioners about their histories and the influence that their practice of martial arts has on their lives. You are listening to the free version of this podcast, which is abbreviated. Help support this program by considering to subscribe to us on Patreon, where you will get 4 full-length podcasts each month, 1 week before the YouTube release date. The cost is that of about 1 coffee shop coffee per month. Go to www.patreon.com/malmag to subscribe. That is www.patreon.com/malmag. If you would like to purchase single full-length episodes of the Martial Arts Lifestyle Podcast, visit our Gumroad page at malmag.gumroad.com, and that is malmag.gumroad.com. In this episode, I sit down on Zoom with an old friend of mine, John Doty. John has a very interesting history starting in the 1960s, studying with some legendary martial artists, seeing some historic events, and today he trains and teaches out of the Panhandle of Florida. Sit back and enjoy. Welcome to the Martial Arts Lifestyle Podcast, and today I've got someone I've been looking forward to interviewing on this show for quite a while because he's one of my oldest and dearest friends, again, in the Hartzell and in the Santo lineage, but mainly Larry. So when I studied with Larry Hartzell in these semi-private classes several times a week for several hours, there was primarily myself and 2 other people, Christopher Harley, and this man here, John Doty, or John Doty. Am I saying it right, Doty or Doty?
Doty.
I always thought that, and somebody kept calling you Doty. I'm like, oh my God, have I been saying this wrong all this time?
That's all right. I take it anyway.
Anyway, welcome, John. I've been looking forward to talking to you on this podcast for quite a while. You were on my very early wish list, and you're a man about the country. You know, you were here in LA, and then you were in Northern California. I knew you when you were up there, or in Oregon, right?
Yeah, Southern Oregon. Yeah,
and then and now you're in the Panhandle of Florida.
Right, Destin, Florida. It's kind of like the mid Panhandle.
Wow. Yeah, and so you've got one interesting story, or many stories, I guess, but an interesting personal biographical story, I think, in this. And if you have looked at the Martial Arts Lifestyle magazine website, the free magazine, you're going to see that there is an article by John on there called Black Eldorado, and it's about some of his time studying with the late great Ed Parker when he was a kid. So let's dive into some of your history, John. So when did you get started in martial arts?
It was 1964. I was about 10, and I was born in 53, but I turned, I'm like one of those late babies. But my dad took me into Ed Parker's Kempo school in Pasadena and enrolled me. And I remember it was $25 a month.
And, wow.
Yeah, I know.
Which was a lot of money then.
I know. No, it's amazing how much it's changed. But no, and I started out in there, and I was this, I was kind of a geeky kid. Wore glasses, when I was like in 3rd grade, and I was not getting beat up a lot, but it was just my dad wanted me to. My dad was a Navy SEAL, World War II underwater demolition.
Wow.
And so that's growing up in his shadow with his kind of thing was, I got to toughen this guy up, because I had 3 sisters and I was the youngest. So he took me in there to quote unquote toughen me up. And it was
living in a house with 3 sisters will make you tough, I'm gonna think.
I know. Come on, man. I know. Come on, man. But it was really interesting because Mr. Parker had a kids program going on, and with Saturdays is when the class was. And we'd go eventually, like after about a year or so, no, it was a couple of years, we got keys. I think when I would turn 13, he gave us keys so that we could ride our bikes down Saturday morning, open the dojo up, turn on the lights, sweep the mats, make sure everything was cool. And then, and then class would start. And then we'd stick around all afternoon. And it was really interesting, Tim, because he would So he had this in the Pasadena school. He had his office, and he had this huge picture window that overlooked the mats. And we'd go out there, and we'd be doing stuff. And one guy like would take his belt off and pretend it was a chain and stuff. And Mr. Parker would sit in there and watch us. And then he'd come out and he'd go, okay, why don't you guys try this? And he'd tell us to, one guy, I want you to box, because we had one guy that was a boxer. So I want you to, use your Kempo stuff against a boxer and see how it goes. Then he'd go back into his office and sit there and watch us do it. And then he'd come back out and go, okay, now, and he'd go through this whole thing. And now it becomes clear to me what he was seeing, what he was doing, because that was back in the, Parker was a pioneer. Parker saw what Bruce Lee had, on my Facebook page for my Oregon school, I have a picture of Ed Parker and Bruce Lee doing Asking Hands, and it was, and I think it's James Lee is on the other side of him with that, but Parker was always exploring new stuff. He was never, he was never happy to be in a box. He had his system, but his system, from what his system was back in those days to what it is now, it's grown up so much. It's not even funny.
Wow.
It's just changed so much. I mean, when I was in the book up to black belt was about this thick.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's like it's a thing, it's a thing. But no, and he was very inclusive with us. I remember it was in Pasadena, and there was a Bob's Big Boy down on Colorado Boulevard. And we used to go down to Bob's Big Boy after class in our gis. He'd come with us, and we'd walk down there and sit there, and he'd buy us hamburgers and hot fudge sundaes. And then we'd come walking back. From Bob's Big Boy, and he'd be pretending like he's crossing the street. And he would start, sorry.
That's okay.
Derek's
We're
son.
not just recording the audio. If somebody needs to walk through, it's okay.
No, but he would like try and cross the street, and he would pretend like he was limping, and his gi with a black belt on it. And all these cars on Walnut Boulevard would come to a stop, and then he'd limp across, and then he'd get to the corner and wave and run up the stairs to the dojo. So no, he was a character. He was a character. I went to Flint Ridge Prep School in La Cañada, Flint Ridge. It was a private boys' school back in those days. And I remember I wanted him, because everybody was talking boxing this, judo this. And I asked him, I said, would you please come do a demo at the school? So he took me, was his support guy, Roger Meadows, me. I was in the middle of the seat of this big black Eldorado, and we went cruising into Flint Ridge in this thing, and I was so proud. I was so like, look at me type guy, And no, and he did it's in the yearbooks and stuff of him doing this demo, and he did a really cool demo and everything. And still nobody. It was back in those days when nobody, if it wasn't boxing or judo or something else, because I know Shotokan was pretty big back then. It was Kempo and Shotokan. But yeah, so the coach was going, oh, a good boxer can take out a karate man any day. And now that I look at it after, so that was in 64, and now I'm sitting here in 2023, and I'm going, you know what? I'm kind of going, yeah, we need boxing attributes in order to fight.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
So
I mean, there was a level of toughness, I think, to the karate guys at that time period, that it's not as simple as it seems now, because I think there's a bit of a difference. Both of these things have evolved differently. So I don't think we can put what 2023's karate versus 2023's boxing is against 1964's.
No.
The art might be the same, but it's just, I think there was just a different athlete, for both at that point. So did Mr. Parker teach the kids class himself?
Yes. Oh, yes. he had another Roger Meadows and another guy named Richard Dick Steele. And those were the three, those were pretty much the three main instructors at the school. But yeah, every Saturday class, he would teach the class. And then it was funny. He left, he'd leave and let us, lock up afterwards. And I remember one day he left and he goes, and no mass attacks, when I'm not here. Because we used to do like one guy in the middle and five guys go in and kind of like
the old pylon. Come on, we all did that.
Yeah. Bunak calls it the nutcracker. It's an exercise that we do. And so he shuts the door and his car didn't clear the driveway before we're on the mats and we're going to do a mass attack. And I remember the guy that was the boxer, he did a spinning back kick and he hit me right under here in the chin. And man, it just opened up. And I remember sticking my finger in there and there was blood all over my gi, and my mom had to come get me and take me to the hospital and get stitches and all this stuff. And yeah, Mr. Parker wasn't happy. He was not happy at all. But he included us. He liked, like when the first internationals down in '64, I went to them. My dad would take me all the time, and we go sit in the stands. And my dad would stay up in the stands, but I'd go with a friend of mine, and we'd just go walk around down on the floor. And we got to mill around about where all the fights are going on and all the demonstrations. And that was the year that Bruce Lee did his demo there.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really, and I had no idea what I was seeing. You know what I mean?
I think you got to see then FMA publicly for the first time too, because I believe that was USA doing demo there. Wow.
Yeah. In fact, it was funny because back in those days, we didn't really have equipment, So I remember stuffing a duffel bag of my dad's full of old clothes and hanging it from a tree. And then I took a broomstick and sawed it in half, and those were my collie sticks. I was doing all sorts of things.
That's pretty neat. So you were 10 then at the '64 international that you went to. So I'm trying to think back when I was 10 years old. I could probably, if I sat and really thought, I could probably come up with a memory or two. But that's a pretty historic event that's been written about, I don't know, who knows how many times. What, as a 10-year-old, stood out to you about that event that you can remember?
I couldn't get over how incredibly nice Mr. Parker was in including us with stuff and just the way he was. It wasn't like, okay, it was, you kids sit over here and don't make trouble or anything like that. But there was no exclusivity. He wanted us. It's like he wanted us to experience this, to see what was going on. And it was fun. It was just a lot of fun. There was a picture in Black Belt magazine, and I remember when that came out, there was a picture of the stands, and I could take a magnifying glass and look down, and I could see my dad in the stands.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which was kind of cool,
That's really awesome. Oh, man. So you were, you kind of have a unique look into a very classic era of martial art development in the United States, being a kid kind of in that era. Who can you remember coming through Ed Parker's place that you might not have thought much at the time, but now you're like, oh my God, that was person X and person Y and person Z?
Let me think. There was a guy named Mike Pick, P-I-C-K, and he was a Vietnam veteran. He had just come back from Vietnam, and he was like the expert on the butterfly knives, and he became Parker's knife guy, and he was really a nice guy. He wrote a book, I remember, back in the late 70s. It was called Boyhood, Manhood, Nomhood, and it was just about his trials and tribulations in the Vietnam War. And he came through. I remember the Larry Tatum, and there was like a whole political thing that went on with that in the 80s. And I remember those guys coming in probably in like 68, 69, Larry Tatum and Jeff Speakman.
Oh, wow. Okay.
were hanging around. And then all of a sudden, Larry Tatum in the early 80s had his own dojo on Colorado Boulevard away from Parker's. And that's when, people started, wondering, well, what's going on? Is there some sort of war going on? And no, it was just, Tatum went his own way. And that's what Parker was, you see. And that's why I was so drawn to Guru Dan, because I know training at the academy, some guys would have a dojo like 2 miles away. Sifu Ray, he had his dojo over on Washington Boulevard or something. And
well, he had one here just literally on the corner by my house where I live now.
Yeah.
Walk to it in 2 minutes. It's not there anymore, but that's where I first saw his school.
Yeah. But it was the inclusivity of, Parker didn't get, it wasn't like, no, you have to stay here and you can't go anywhere else. And I saw that too with Dan. I saw the way, Guru Dan was that, he wants people to grow and to expand and to explore their own self, to find their own Jeet Kune Do.
Right. So do you still practice Kempo now, or
no, I haven't done Kempo for a long time, probably good 25 years.
Okay.
25
so but
years.
You did stick with it, it sounds like, quite a while then.
Yeah, I stuck with it in through the 80s.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And I remember what was it? It was something took me to Inosanto Academy back in like the mid 90s, like 93, 94. And I remember Burton Richardson had a school in, I think it was Hermosa Beach.
Mm-hmm.
Either Hermosa or Manhattan. I get the two mixed up. But and so Burton was actually my first Kali instructor, my first FMA instructor. Because I knew a woman, I was friends with a woman named June Castro, who was, you've heard of her. Yeah, her dad was Ralph Castro, who basically he and Ed Parker kind of started Kempo in the United States. And he was up in the Bay Area and Parker was down here. So I hung out with her, we were just friends and we'd hang out, and she was dating Burton at the time. And she says, you got to come see this guy and everything. And so I went and I trained with him. And then I started going to the academy a little bit, but then I kept going back to Burton's, because I think I've always been kind of shy, especially around, when things come in. I'm not a big one to walk into a room and,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean?
Right.
And I just like the vibe down at Burton's. So I hung out there for a while, and then I'd come to the academy, and when I met Sifu Larry, he encouraged me. It was about like mid 90s, I think. He encouraged me to go box for a year. So I went to Redwood's boxing gym on Venice Boulevard, right over by Venice and Centinela, I think. It's Brian Hawkins Kempo is there.
Right.
Yeah, and that used to be Redwoods, and
okay.
It was interesting because that was a tough guy boxing gym. I mean, there was always, you could always find a mouthpiece underneath the boxing ring if you looked. There was blood on the mats, and it was really cool to do that. And then June Castro started hanging out there at Redwoods also. And so she brought in Victor Gendaro.
Yeah.
I pronounce his name wrong, but yeah, she brought him in.
He just passed, I think, the anniversary of his passing.
Yes, I saw
and we
that.
were all going, oh my God, it's been
5 years. Yeah.
And unfortunately, the COVID thing just kind of, you always have to add to what you think.
Yeah.
Right. And I remember we were getting ready to do, I think, a second year celebration thing or something for him when COVID hit, and we couldn't do it. And, fortunately, we've lost a handful of people in the meantime, and we haven't been able to quite get to memorials yet. So I'm hoping we can in the next year, because it feels weird, that we haven't had time to meet some people, but, we'll get there.
It does. But I mean, you know what, Tim, we privately honor them. They're always in our hearts and always in our prayers, thinking about it. No, so and then from Redwoods, I'd still go back over the Inosanto Academy, and I'd bounce back and forth and everything. And I can tell you that the boxing, that year of boxing, and I stayed longer than a year at boxing. I loved it. I loved it. And in fact, I met Nicholas Signac there too. He'd come around to Redwoods. Redwood had a lot of heavy hitters from Inosanto Academy would come over there.
Wow.
He had Friday night fights, where it was called smokers, those 1 minute rounds. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But boxing really opened my eyes, because before, I my little bit of exposure to FMA, and then, at the academy. But then when I started to get into the boxing, I started to really understand how the body moves, and how, that maybe even with Kempo that I was being a little too stiff, and I was too dependent on this stance that's just there, rather than my motion being able to ground and hit, and then pick up and move more, ground and hit, pick up, move more, and continue on. So yeah, I really like boxing. I still box a little, but I remember after I got hit a couple times at Redwoods back in like 99, 2000. And I remember wondering why I was always dizzy all the time.
No.
Yeah, I got punch drunk.
Too. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I got punch drunk. And a doctor told me, he says, like, what was I in the 90s? I was in my 40s. He says, you're a 40-year-old man. He says, you don't need to be running around getting hit in the head all the time.
Well, yeah, not only that, I mean, there's a thing of where you're a veteran, you're a military veteran too. So, and you were in combat, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I think you've done enough of that. Probably don't need to rack your head around that much anymore. But, the experience is good. And, as we find some safer ways to do that, certainly an interview from a few before you, Natasha Lepore, who you may remember from the academy. She does a lot of work in reading brain scans and creating way reading and new machines and stuff. She would fully agree. Like, she would almost be horrified, I think, by what we're talking about with the shots to the head. She's just like, oh my God,
And what was fun is during my career is I was a private investigator basically for my whole life. And when I found out in the early 90s that all my martial arts training was tax deductible, because I did protection work too, much to the chagrin of my wife, who didn't comprehend my love of the martial arts. But it then meant that I could just go and take classes and drink up all this knowledge and just get everything. And that's what I love so much about it, because it was applicable for work. And, even as I guarded Jesse Jackson for a while, and I was with him at the 2000 Democratic Convention in Los Angeles.
Oh, wow.
And I was Alec Baldwin. I did a lot of stars. And you know what? I never really had to use martial arts. People would say, wow, blah, blah, blah. And I found that it gave me a presence. It allowed me to be a certain way, that if I needed it, sure, it was there. But it allowed me just to be a certain way, to have a certain look that just allowed things to happen. It was kind of amazing.
And this concludes the abbreviated version of the Martial Arts Lifestyle Podcast. Please click the like and subscribe buttons, as well as the notification bell. Also consider subscribing to the full-length podcast at www.patreon.com/malmag, or purchasing individual full-length episodes at malmag.gumroad.com. Thank you for listening to this episode with John Doty. Coming up next week, we have yet another dynamic martial artist, Fayetteville, Arkansas's own Diem Nguyen. Check out the Malmag store at www.martialartslifestylemagazine.com and click on the store tab. There, you will find a full selection of Timmy B's brand sticks for FMA and Krabi Krabong, as well as Timmy B's and Dos Manos t-shirts. Many more products coming soon. Also click on our courses tab to purchase online courses, right now featuring a course in the Dos Manos stick of FMA. More courses to come. This show is produced by Martial Arts Lifestyle Magazine. Visit us at www.martialartslifestylemagazine.com and enjoy the free version of our online magazine with articles, a recommended schools page, and a worldwide events calendar. Music by Jack Al Relic. Martial Arts Lifestyle Magazine and the Martial Arts Lifestyle Podcast are trademarked and copyrighted by TNT LLC.